A 13-second clip shakes BTS and ARMY. Taehyung caught insulting Jungkook. Jungkook's emotional live response opens old wounds. What's the truth behind it all? The world stopped in its tracks with a single line: if he only cares about Jimin, then fine. Let him make a duo with him. The words were cold and cutting, piercing through the air with a brutal clarity. It wasn't a joke, not even close. It wasn't just the content of the statement that sent shockwaves through the army, but the look on Taehyung's face, a face that showed no warmth, no affection, just a quiet seriousness that made it clear he meant every word. This was no playful teasing between friends. This was something deeper, something raw, and something that would tear at the already fragile fabric of their bond. The clip lasted only 13 seconds, yet it was enough to set the internet on fire. Fans of BTS, who had always seen them as the epitome of brotherhood, suddenly found themselves staring into the abyss of a possible rift between two of the group's most beloved members, Taehyung and Jungkook. The video spread like wildfire, and within minutes, Twitter was flooded with hashtags. Hashtag protect Jungkook, hashtag what did Jungkook do, and hashtag Taehyung said what. Everyone was talking about it, dissecting every word, every possible context. Some fans rushed to defend Jungkook, claiming that the video was taken out of context, while others angrily pointed fingers at Taehyung, questioning his loyalty and accusing him of trying to drive a wedge between the members. And then there were those who were simply waiting for one thing: Jungkook's response. Jungkook, who had always been the steady anchor of the group, now found himself the center of a storm that he never asked for. He had always been the one to mediate, the one who kept the peace. But this time, there was no peace to be made. The tension between him and Taehyung was no longer something that could be ignored or brushed under the rug. It was real, it was painful, and it was about to come to a head. That evening, Jungkook went live on Weverse. His appearance was unfiltered, raw. His hoodie was pulled over his head, his face devoid of makeup, eyes slightly red as though he hadn't been sleeping. He sat there, staring at the screen, his fingers nervously tapping against the desk. For several minutes, he said nothing. The silence was heavy, palpable. Fans flooded the comments, waiting for him to speak, waiting for some kind of explanation. But Jungkook remained still, lost in his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, fragile and breaking under the weight of unspoken emotions. Sometimes the most painful thing isn't when strangers doubt you. It's when someone you consider a brother says something like that. His words struck like a hammer to the chest, raw with hurt and betrayal. Jungkook wasn't just talking about the viral clip. He was speaking about something much deeper, something that had been brewing for a long time. He paused, letting the words settle. The fans were on edge, unsure of what he would say next. Was he going to explain himself? Was he going to say something that could ease their worries? But instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. But I'm not perfect. Maybe I care too much, and maybe that's my fault. And just as the stream seemed to be winding down, a new figure appeared beside him. Jimin slid into the frame, his presence sudden but not surprising. He looked at the camera, his expression unreadable, yet his words were sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. If you think you know everything that's happened, trust me, you don't know anything. And with that, Jimin's words left fans in a state of shock. What was going on behind closed doors? What was happening between the members of BTS that they weren't telling the public? The next day, Big Hit Entertainment released a statement, claiming the video had been taken out of context and didn't reflect the true relationship between the members. But no official statement could erase the rawness of what had just been shared. The cracks in their bond were no longer something hidden behind the scenes. They were out in the open, and the world was watching. The following night, BTS released a new track titled Silence Between Us. The lyrics were haunting, a reflection of everything that had been left unsaid. The arguments that had never been voiced, the silence that had grown too loud, and the love that had remained unspoken. The song wasn't just a message to their fans. It was a message to each other. The silence between them had become unbearable, and now it was too loud to ignore. What would happen next? Could the three of them, Taehyung, Jungkook, and Jimin ever mend the rift that had formed between them? Or was this the beginning of the end for the brotherhood that had once been unbreakable? Only time would tell. The sound of a phone vibrating against a wooden table echoed through the quiet of Taehyung's hotel room. He stared at it, unsure if he should pick it up. It was already late, and yet the message had not stopped haunting him. The clip, Jungkook's live, and now Jimin's cryptic words. Everything was weighing on him, and it seemed impossible to escape the tight grip of his guilt. For the past few days, Taehyung had been drowning in his own mind, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. His thoughts constantly circled back to that moment in the practice room when his frustration had spilled over. He had never intended for it to go this far, but once the words left his mouth, there was no taking them back. Why did I say that? Taehyung whispered to himself, running a hand through his messy hair. The image of Jungkook's face, pained and broken, haunted him like a shadow that refused to leave. How had they ended up here? How had something so small, something so personal, turned into a public spectacle? But the truth was, Taehyung couldn't deny the feelings that had been building up for months. Watching Jungkook and Jimin grow closer, witnessing their shared moments of camaraderie, had unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just jealousy, it was something deeper, something tied to his own fear of being left behind. He had always been the one to hold the group together with his jokes, his energy, but lately, it felt as though he had been slipping into the background. The vibrations of his phone broke his thoughts. It was another message, this time from Jimin. Taehyung hesitated, but after a long moment, he opened it. "We need to talk." Jimin's words were simple, yet they sent a ripple of anxiety through Taehyung. He had been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. He had no idea what to expect when he faced his friend. Was Jimin angry? Disappointed? Or perhaps both? A knock on his door pulled him out of his thoughts. He stood up quickly, his heart racing in his chest. When he opened the door, there was Jimin, standing there in his usual soft smile, but his eyes, those eyes, were anything but gentle. "Can I come in?" Jimin asked, his voice steady, though the tension was palpable. Taehyung stepped aside, allowing Jimin to enter. He closed the door quietly behind them, his chest tight with the weight of the moment. They sat down at the small table by the window, the city lights outside casting a dim glow on the room. Neither of them spoke for a long time, and Taehyung could feel the air between them thick with unsaid things. Jimin was the first to break the silence. "You know I would never betray you, right?" His voice was calm, but the words carried a deeper meaning. Taehyung nodded slowly, but his throat felt tight, the words trapped inside. He had never wanted to hurt Jimin, and yet he had done just that. "I know." Taehyung finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. Jimin let out a deep sigh, leaning back in his chair. "Then why, Taehyung? Why did you say that about Jungkook?" The question hung in the air, sharp and raw. Taehyung stared at the floor, struggling to find the right words. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, but he knew he had to explain himself. I didn't mean it," he said, the words coming out choked. "I was frustrated, and I let my feelings get the best of me. But it wasn't about Jungkook, not really. It was about me, about how I've been feeling." Jimin's eyes softened, though there was still a hint of sadness in his expression. "I understand that you're struggling, Taehyung. We all are in our own way. But what you said, it wasn't just frustration. It hurt Jungkook, and it hurt all of us. You have to realize that we're not just a group on stage. We're brothers, and when you say things like that, it tears us apart." Taehyung's breath hitched. I know I messed up," he said, his voice barely audible. "But it's hard, Jimin. I feel like I'm losing everyone, like I'm being pushed out. Jungkook and you two are so close now, and I don't know where I fit anymore." Jimin's expression softened, and he leaned forward, placing a hand gently on Taehyung's. "You're not losing us, Taehyung. You've never been pushed out. But you have to talk to us. You have to trust us. Don't let your fears turn into something that tears us apart. We're a family, and families fight, but we also forgive. You have to start by forgiving yourself." Taehyung looked up at Jimin, feeling the weight of his words settle into his heart. He had been so caught up in his own insecurities that he hadn't realized how much his actions were affecting the people he cared about most. The guilt washed over him like a tidal wave, and he felt his chest tighten with the need to say everything that had been left unsaid. "I'm sorry," Taehyung whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the things I said, for letting my own fears take over. I don't want to lose you guys. I don't want to lose Jungkook." Jimin smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "We're not going anywhere, Taehyung, but you have to be honest with us. We can't help you if you don't tell us what's really going on." Taehyung nodded, feeling a flicker of hope in his heart. He didn't know how to fix everything, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't do it alone. The next day, after a long day of rehearsals, Taehyung found himself standing in front of Jungkook's door. His heart raced in his chest, and he could feel the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. This was the hardest part, the moment where he would have to face the consequences of his actions and hope that Jungkook could still see him as the friend he once was. With a deep breath, he knocked. "Jungkook?" Taehyung called softly when the door opened. Jungkook stood there, his eyes still tired, but there was something different now. A softness, a willingness to listen. "I'm sorry," Taehyung began, his voice trembling. "For everything. For the words I said, for letting my own feelings get in the way. I never wanted to hurt you, Jungkook. You're my brother. And I'm so sorry I made you feel anything less than that." Jungkook's gaze softened, and he stepped aside, letting Taehyung in. The silence between them felt different now. Not cold, not distant, but full of the kind of tension that came before something deep, something real. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Taehyung," Jungkook said quietly, his voice still raw. "But I need you to know, I never wanted to make you feel like you were being pushed aside. You're not alone, and we're still brothers, no matter what." Taehyung felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and a lot of talking. But for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could fix this. The days following Taehyung's apology were a delicate dance of unspoken words and cautious interactions. There was still an air of tension between him and Jungkook, but at least they were speaking again. The silent rift had not been mended completely, but there was a slow, hesitant reconciliation brewing beneath the surface. Jungkook had withdrawn a little, keeping to himself more than usual. But every now and then, Taehyung would catch a fleeting glance, a slight smile shared during rehearsals, a subtle acknowledgement in passing. It wasn't much, but it was progress. In their downtime, Jimin, the ever-mediator, pulled them together, trying to keep things from falling apart again. But Taehyung knew that the real work would have to come from both of them. He and Jungkook needed to rebuild their trust, brick by brick. And that process, he quickly realized, was not as simple as apologizing and moving on. Just when things seemed to be inching back to normal, an unexpected phone call threw everything into chaos again. The media, always quick to stir the pot, had released an interview with one of BTS's staff members, who spoke cryptically about the rift between Taehyung and Jungkook. The press jumped on it, fueling rumors that the group was falling apart. Taehyung's frustration flared once more, this time at the external pressure pushing him and Jungkook further apart. He could see the strain in Jungkook's eyes during the following rehearsal. His silence was louder than any words. In an attempt to break the tension, Taehyung initiated a conversation, hoping they could clear the air once and for all. "Jungkook, we need to stop letting everyone else control this narrative," Taehyung said one evening, his voice low but firm. Jungkook didn't respond immediately, his gaze distant. The silence stretched for too long before he finally spoke, his words cutting through the heavy air. "It's not just the fans, Taehyung. It's us. I don't know how we got here." The hurt in Jungkook's voice was undeniable, and for a moment, Taehyung was struck by how far apart they really were. They weren't just dealing with rumors. They were dealing with their own pain, their own distance. The night after their conversation, the group gathered for dinner, but the atmosphere was heavy. There was no laughter, no teasing between the members, only silence that felt almost suffocating. Jimin's attempts to lighten the mood fell flat as the three of them, Taehyung, Jungkook, and Jimin, avoided eye contact. But it was Jimin who finally spoke the words that had been hanging in the air for so long. "We can't keep pretending everything's fine," he said quietly, his voice steady but full of concern. We need to address what's going on between the three of us. The silence was suffocating. Jungkook looked up first, his eyes tired, but there was something softer in his gaze now. I don't know if I can just move past this, he confessed, his voice strained. I don't know if I can just forgive and forget. It's not that simple. Taehyung looked at him, his heart aching, knowing that this wasn't just about words anymore. It was about the scars left from months of unspoken fears, frustrations, and miscommunications. I don't expect you to forget, Taehyung whispered. But I'm here. I want to fix this, Jungkook. I don't want us to be like this. Jimin, sensing the fragile truce between the two, put a hand on each of their shoulders. We've always been brothers, and brothers fight, but brothers also make up, right? The moment was tense, fragile, but for the first time in days, it felt like they were on the verge of something real. Healing, though slow, was possible. And with that unspoken truth hanging in the air, the members of BTS knew their journey of mending wasn't over. It had only just begun. The weight of unspoken words lingered between them, pressing down with every passing day. Taehyung, Jungkook, and Jimin all knew that the silence was no longer an option. They couldn't keep avoiding the truth that had been building up for months. It was time to face the things they had buried deep inside. The days after their conversation had been a quiet dance of awkward smiles and tentative gestures. Taehyung had tried to make amends in every small way he could, whether through gestures of kindness or simply by being present. But he knew that these small acts couldn't undo the damage that had been done. He needed to be more honest, not just with Jungkook, but with himself. One evening, after a long rehearsal, Taehyung found himself standing outside the practice room, watching Jungkook and Jimin talk quietly by the side. The faint laughter between the two made something stir in his chest, both warmth and discomfort. It wasn't jealousy, he realized, it was fear. Fear of losing the closeness they once shared, fear of being the odd one out. Jimin, noticing Taehyung standing by himself, excused himself and walked over. You should talk to him, he said softly, glancing over at Jungkook. This silence, it's eating both of you alive. Taehyung hesitated. I don't know where to start, Jimin. I'm afraid if I say the wrong thing, I'll make it worse. Jimin gave him a small, understanding smile. You've already made the first step. You've apologized. Now it's time to open up completely. Let Jungkook see what's been going on in your heart. Taking a deep breath, Taehyung nodded. He walked toward Jungkook, his footsteps heavy but resolute. Jungkook turned toward him as he approached, his expression unreadable. I need to talk to you, Taehyung said quietly, his voice betraying a trace of the vulnerability he'd been hiding for so long. Jungkook nodded slowly, his face softening. They found a quiet corner of the studio, away from the prying eyes of the other members. The tension in the air was palpable, but Taehyung knew that this moment was necessary. It was their moment to finally let everything out. Jungkook, Taehyung began, his voice shaking slightly. I've been afraid. I've been afraid of being replaced. Afraid of losing you. Losing all of you. It's not just about the performance or the fans or the group. It's about me feeling like I'm drifting away. And it scares me. Jungkook stood there in silence, processing the words. His eyes were soft, searching Taehyung's face as though trying to understand what he had just heard. The vulnerability in Taehyung's voice caught him off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. Finally, Jungkook spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Taehyung, I've never wanted you to feel that way. I've never meant to make you feel like you weren't important. But I get it now. You've been struggling with this on your own, and you didn't say anything. Taehyung's heart clenched as he heard the truth in Jungkook's words. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to burden anyone. But I can't keep it inside anymore. You're my brother, Jungkook, and I need you to know that. Jungkook stepped closer, his gaze softening. I am sorry, Taehyung. I should have noticed. I should have seen the signs. But I was too wrapped up in my own stuff, too focused on my own struggles. The air between them shifted then, as if a weight had been lifted. There was still so much to work through, so many layers to peel back, but for the first time, there was a sense of understanding. Taehyung smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd shown in days. Maybe we've both been afraid, he said quietly. But we don't have to be afraid of each other. We don't have to let this distance grow any bigger. Jungkook nodded slowly. No, we don't. We've got each other, Taehyung. No matter what happens, we're brothers. And we'll get through this together. And just like that, the silence that had been suffocating them finally began to break. There were still more conversations to have, more apologies to give, but for the first time in a long while, they both knew they could face what was ahead together. The weeks after their heart-to-heart conversation felt like a slow but steady healing process. Taehyung and Jungkook were no longer avoiding each other. They didn't need to speak every moment, but the unspoken tension had finally lifted. There were still cracks between them, but those cracks were slowly being filled with understanding and trust. The group schedule was relentless, and the media didn't stop their relentless pursuit of rumors. But inside the bubble of BTS, things were beginning to feel more like they used to. Jimin, always the glue that kept them together, continued to help guide Taehyung and Jungkook toward one another, but now it felt like the foundation they were rebuilding was solidifying. One evening, as they were practicing a new track in the studio, Jungkook approached Taehyung. He had been quiet for most of the session, but his gaze met Taehyung's with a certain intensity. Can we talk? Jungkook asked, his voice steady, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes. Taehyung nodded, feeling a tightness in his chest. He had been waiting for this moment, but unsure if he was truly ready. They stepped into a side room, away from the others, and for a few moments, the words seemed to hang between them like a weight. I know things haven't been easy, Jungkook began, his voice lower than usual. But I want you to know I don't blame you. I don't blame anyone. We're all dealing with our own things. Taehyung swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. I know I made things worse by keeping everything inside. I should have trusted you more. And I'm sorry for making you feel like I was pushing you away. Jungkook's face softened, and he placed a hand on Taehyung's shoulder. I understand now. It hurt, you know? But I've been thinking a lot about everything. And maybe I should have seen the signs too. We both made mistakes. But we're here now, right? Taehyung nodded, his heart racing. Yeah, we're here. And I don't want to let anything tear us apart again. There was a long pause, and for the first time in weeks, Taehyung felt something close to peace. The tension that had defined so much of their interactions was gone, replaced by an unspoken promise to rebuild. Slowly, carefully, but together, the quiet understanding between Taehyung and Jungkook continued to grow, but there was a new pressure mounting on the group. With a comeback looming, the stress of preparing for their new album, and a constant media scrutiny, the cracks in their unity began to show again. Taehyung found himself slipping back into old habits, burying his fears, his doubts, and his insecurities. The pressure to be perfect, to meet everyone's expectations, was suffocating. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not with the world watching. Jungkook noticed the change almost immediately. Taehyung was quieter again, withdrawn. They had worked so hard to rebuild, and now it felt like the walls were starting to go up once more. One night, during a break from rehearsal, Jungkook pulled Taehyung aside. What's going on? He asked, his voice concerned. Taehyung's eyes flickered to the ground. I don't know. I'm frustrated, goose. Tired of pretending like everything's okay. Jungkook's expression softened. You don't have to do that, Taehyung. You don't have to carry everything on your own. We're all in this together. Don't shut us out again. The words hit Taehyung harder than he expected. He had been trying so hard to carry the weight of everything, convinced that his struggles would only burden his members. But Jungkook was right. They weren't just a group on stage, they were a family. And families leaned on each other. I'm sorry, Taehyung whispered. I don't want to shut you out. I just don't want to disappoint anyone. Jungkook smiled softly, putting a hand on Taehyung's shoulder. You're not alone, Taehyung. We got your back. Always. Taehyung felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead would be filled with more challenges. But in that moment, surrounded by his brothers, he knew he didn't have to face it alone. As BTS's comeback drew closer, the weight of their personal struggles and the pressure of the public, I seemed to grow heavier. But in the midst of it all, something shifted. Taehyung, Jungkook, and the entire group had slowly but surely begun to heal. not just as performers, but as people. The walls that had once divided them were coming down, piece by piece. Taehyung had opened up more, allowing himself to lean on his members, especially Jungkook. The distance that had once seemed insurmountable was now a faint memory. They were talking more, not just about music or schedules, but about their personal lives, their fears, and their dreams. They weren't just colleagues. They were a family again on the night of their comeback stage. BTS stood together in front of thousands of fans. The familiar rush of adrenaline flooded through them as the lights blazed and the crowd erupted. But this time there was something different. The energy on stage was raw, honest, and filled with a new sense of unity. Their bond, tested by time and tension, had been reforged stronger than ever. After the performance, the group gathered backstage, breathless and exhilarated. Jungkook looked over at Taehyung, giving him a nod. It wasn't a grand gesture, but in that simple exchange, everything they'd been through seemed to fade away. They had made it through the storm. "We're back," Taehyung said quietly, his voice full of emotion. Jungkook smiled, a real smile this time. "Yeah, we are." But their healing didn't stop with the stage. In the days that followed, BTS took time to reflect, support one another, and continue to grow together. Taehyung and Jungkook, once at odds, now found solace in their newfound understanding. There were no more secrets between them, no more unspoken fears that BTS's journey wasn't just about the music, it was about finding strength in one another and in themselves. They knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but they were no longer alone. They were family, and together they could face anything. The end.